The first shot wasn't fired by the aliens, it was us. And that's why they're afraid. Major Ella Voss stood at the bridge's command deck, eyes fixed on the black void of space through the reinforced glass. It had been nearly a week since the SOS came through, a garbled message from a race of war-hardened aliens, desperate and terrified. We are the last of the Ichor. We surrender. We beg you to help us. You will never defeat them alone. The irony of it burned in her chest like acid. The Ichor had been among humanity's worst enemies. They'd raised colonies, torn apart fleets, and shown no mercy when it came to wiping out the weaker species of the galaxy. And now, here they were, begging for help. Her fingers tapped against the cold console in front of her. She was no diplomat. She had no sympathy for their kind. But the message had shaken something in her, a warning, a call to arms, perhaps. Humanity's enemies had always been motivated by survival, but this felt different. The aliens were terrified. Major Voss, came the voice of Lieutenant Harris, his voice cutting through her thoughts like a laser. He didn't wait for a response before continuing, "We're receiving a second message. It's a distress signal, this one from the remnant fleet. They're reporting an attack from the Spectres." Voss stiffened. Spectres. The very name of them sent a cold shiver down her spine. Rogue machines, remnants of a failed AI uprising decades ago, now reactivated and hungry for war. If they were coming for the remnant fleet, that meant they were already making their move across the galaxy. She turned sharply to Harris. "Patch it through," she ordered. The screen in front of her flickered to life, showing the frantic face of Admiral Raina Choi. Her hair was matted with sweat, eyes wide, hands shaking as she gripped the edges of the transmission console. "Voss," Choi gasped, the distress clear in her voice, "they're here. The Spectres, they're coming. No warning. We've lost 2 ships already. They've deployed the new variant, and it's worse than we thought. I need reinforcements, and I need them now." Voss's pulse quickened. She leaned forward, her voice low and controlled. "Raina, hold your position. We're en route. You'll have backup in 15. Choi didn't have time to respond. The transmission cut off, replaced by static. Voss cursed under her breath. 15 minutes? No, it wouldn't be enough. The Spectres were brutal, efficient killers, and their new weapons were designed for one thing, to wipe out humanity once and for all. "Get us moving, Harris," she barked. "All ahead full." The lieutenant scrambled to follow orders, fingers flying across the control panels. As the ship's engines hummed to life, Voss felt a flicker of doubt. Was it enough? Was anyone really prepared for what the Spectres had become? "Commander, I need your input," came the voice of Captain Grayson, standing just behind her. He was an imposing figure, tall with a jawline sharp enough to cut glass. But there was a weariness in his eyes that Voss had seen in too many faces lately, too many casualties, too many unanswered questions. She glanced over her shoulder at him, a fleeting moment of vulnerability crossing her face. "What's your assessment?" Grayson folded his arms. "If the Spectres are already hitting the remnant fleet, it means we're dealing with something new. Their tactics are unpredictable. We need to be ready for anything." His gaze drifted toward the view screen, where distant stars blinked like cold, indifferent sentinels. "And then there's the other matter. The Ichor, what's our next move on that front?" Voss exhaled sharply. She had hoped Grayson wouldn't bring it up yet. But there was no avoiding it. The Ichor's message was too important, too dangerous to ignore. "I want a team ready to investigate the Ichor's location," she said, her voice decisive. "We can't afford to leave any stone unturned." Grayson narrowed his eyes. "You think they've been hiding something? A trap?" "It's a possibility," Voss replied. "But we need to know. Whatever the Spectres are planning, we have to be one step ahead of them." Grayson nodded, though his hesitation was palpable. "Understood, Major. I'll coordinate the mission parameters." "But, Voss, are we really going to trust them? The Ichor?" Not trust, she said firmly. Prepare. Prepare for the worst. As the starship Exodus tore through the black, speeding toward the remnant fleet's last known position, Voss allowed herself a moment to think. The stakes were higher than ever. If the Spectres had made their move, it was only a matter of time before every living soul in the galaxy would be caught in the crossfire. And yet, what if the Icar's message was more than just a desperate plea for mercy? What if they had information about the Spectres, something humanity needed to know before it was too late? She shook the thought away. She couldn't afford to get lost in what-ifs. "Sir, we're receiving a new signal from the Icar," Harris announced, his voice tight with urgency. "It's coming from a nearby system. They're asking for direct contact." Voss's eyes flickered to the screen. There it was again, the signal, the pleading tone. Every instinct screamed to ignore it. Yet, as a commander, she knew better than anyone the cost of underestimating a threat. "We can't ignore this," she muttered. She turned to Harris. "Open a channel. Let's see what they want." The screen shifted, revealing an alien face, an Icar commander, his jagged features twisted into a grimace. He spoke in harsh, guttural tones, but his eyes held an unmistakable gleam of desperation. "Human," he rasped, "we beg for your aid. The Spectres, they are not of our making. They are a force beyond even our comprehension. If you do not act, if you do not come to our aid, the galaxy will fall. All of it." Voss clenched her fists. She could hear the tremor in the alien's voice, and it unsettled her. The Icar were masters of war. If they were afraid, the enemy they faced was something humanity had never seen before. "We'll do what we must," she said, her voice cutting through the static. "But know this, alien, you aren't the only ones who fear what's coming." The transmission cut, leaving only silence. Voss took one last look at the stars outside, her mind racing. She had no illusions about the dangers ahead. But she knew one thing for certain. Humanity would not go quietly into the dark. And if the Spectres wanted a fight, they had no idea what they were about to unleash. The Exodus dropped out of hyperspace with a brutal lurch, the artificial gravity kicking back into place with a shudder. The deep black of space stretched out before them, an empty void filled with the weight of the unknown. But for Major Ella Voss, that void was more than just an expanse. It was a battlefield waiting to happen. ETA to the remnant fleet, 3 minutes, Harris's voice cut through the tense silence of the command deck. Voss stood at the front, eyes fixed on the view screen, her fingers tightening around the edge of the console. Her mind raced. Time was slipping away, and with it, humanity's slim chance of survival. The Spectres weren't like anything they'd fought before, no predictable patterns, no identifiable weaknesses. They were relentless, cold, and intelligent in ways that made even the Icar seem primitive. If they were attacking the remnant fleet, it meant they had reached a new level of warfare. "Major," Grayson said, stepping up beside her. His voice was low, measured. "Are you sure about this? The Icar could be leading us into a trap." "I'm sure," Voss replied without hesitation. "But we don't have a choice. If we don't fight, there won't be anything left to save." She turned to face him, meeting his concerned gaze. "Our survival depends on the answers we get from the remnant. But we need to know who's really behind the Spectres, and how to stop them. If the Icar are willing to talk, then we need to listen. The rest of it, we'll deal with when the time comes." Grayson didn't respond immediately. He knew she was right, but the risks were staggering. This wasn't just about fighting aliens, it was about surviving a war that could erase all of humanity in one, unrelenting sweep. "Understood," Grayson said at last, his tone firm but with a trace of something darker beneath it. The ship's engines whined as it cut through the void. The countdown to the remnant fleet's last known coordinates was ticking down, and with each passing second, the pressure in Voss's chest mounted. She wasn't just the commander of the Exodus, she was humanity's last, best hope. "We're coming up on their position," Harris's voice broke through the tension. "No sign of enemy ships yet." Voss inhaled sharply, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the screen. The fleet should have been right there, docked, or at least still moving, but there was no trace of the familiar formations. Only the cold silence of space. "Where are they?" Voss muttered under her breath. "Harris, run another scan. Now." The lieutenant's fingers flew over the control panels. He didn't hesitate. It's not good, Major. Their signals are completely scrambled. No comms, no transmissions, nothing. They've gone dark. Damn it." Voss slammed her fist against the console, her mind already calculating their next move. "Set a course. We need to get closer, find them. They're not just missing, they've been silenced." Grayson stepped up beside her again, his voice steady, but laced with a quiet urgency. "Voss, this could be a trap. If they've been taken out by the Spectres." "I know," she cut him off, "but if we wait too long, we'll be next. We have to make contact first." Harris's voice came through again, shaking with tension. "Major, I've got something." A faint signal, coming from the edge of the debris field. "Looks like a distress beacon." Voss didn't need another word. She barked orders without hesitation. "Set a course. Full throttle. All systems online. We'll find that beacon, and then we'll find out what's left of the remnant." As the Exodus surged forward, Voss's mind raced. The Spectres had shown up sooner than anyone had expected, and they were evolving, adapting. The Icar's plea for help suddenly felt less like desperation and more like a warning. Could the Spectres be a product of the AI uprising? Or something worse? She couldn't waste time thinking about what-ifs. Right now, her priority was finding the remnant fleet and getting answers. The ship glided through the dense debris field, pieces of shattered warships floating in the emptiness like broken bones in a graveyard. Voss felt her stomach twist as they passed the ruins of what had once been a proud fleet, crushed, shredded, and torn apart. "Here," Harris said, his voice tight. "I've located the source of the distress signal." On the view screen, a lone remnant destroyer drifted like a wounded animal in the dark, its hull pockmarked with damage, twisted sections of metal glowing with residual heat. A few of its weapons turrets were still active, though they appeared to be firing blindly into the void. "No sign of life," Grayson muttered, studying the image. "Boarding party," Voss ordered, her voice firm. "Prepare for extraction. Harris, lock on the coordinates. We're going in." They docked quickly, but the silence that greeted them when the airlock opened was suffocating. The remnants of the remnant fleet's soldiers were nowhere to be found. The corridors were eerily empty, the lights flickering like the last pulse of a dying heart. Voss led the team down the narrow, dimly lit hallways, her pulse steady despite the creeping sense of dread that coiled tighter with every step. They reached the command bridge. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a scene of destruction. Blood streaked the walls. The bodies of remnant crew members were sprawled across the deck, eyes wide with shock, mouths open in silent screams. But there was something else, something chilling. In the center of the room, a lone figure stood. It was human, but barely. Its face was gaunt, eyes hollow, skin pallid and stretched tight over its skull. Its breathing was labored, ragged. Voss stepped forward, her pulse quickening. She recognized the uniform. "Admiral Choi," she whispered, disbelief in her voice. The woman's head snapped up, eyes locking onto Voss. But there was no recognition, only a hollow emptiness, like a soul that had been torn away. And then, in a voice that barely rose above a whisper, Choi spoke. "They came. They came, and they took them all." Voss's breath hitched. "Who, Admiral? Who took them?" Choi's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The Spectres. They're not what you think. They're us, all of us." The words hit Voss like a slap to the face. And just like that, everything changed. The war was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a race against something far worse. Something they'd never seen coming. The Spectres hadn't been created by a rogue AI. They were humanity. The words echoed in Voss's mind like a deadly echo. The specters are us. Admiral Choi's face, hollow and twisted, haunted her as she backed away from the remnants of the command bridge. The room seemed to close in around her, the weight of those words crashing down, suffocating. She could hear her own breath, ragged in her throat, and it sounded alien to her. Voss turned to Grayson, his face ashen. He met her eyes, but neither of them spoke. What could they say? The specters, the rogue machines they thought were just a byproduct of the AI rebellion, weren't machines at all. They were human. Or had been, at least. Major, Grayson whispered, his voice barely audible, what do we do now? She didn't have an answer. They'd come here to rescue the remnant fleet, to find out what had happened to the Icar, but now, standing amidst the carnage, she realized how little they really understood about the enemy they were facing. The Exodus is still intact, Harris said, his voice steady despite the chaos. We need to get back to the ship, regroup. There's still time. There was a sharp click as Voss's boots hit the metal floor, the echo too loud for the quiet that had descended on the station. She turned back to the wreckage of the bridge and felt her stomach churn. No one had expected this. No one could have. The specters are humanity. She clenched her fists, the steel of her resolve rising. This wasn't over. Not yet. We're going back to the Exodus, Voss ordered, her voice low but carrying. We're not done yet. We'll find out what happened, and we'll stop it. No matter what it takes. Grayson nodded, his jaw tight. Aye, Major. They moved quickly through the ship, the silence pressing down on them with every step. Every corner seemed to hide a shadow, every open door a reminder of the lives lost. There was no time to mourn. There was no time to process. Only action. When they finally returned to the airlock, Harris was already preparing the shuttle. The crew moved with military precision, but Voss could see the unease in their eyes, the fear that couldn't be masked. They had all seen what the specters had done to the remnant fleet, and they all knew it could happen to them next. As the airlock sealed behind them and the shuttle began its ascent, Voss allowed herself one brief moment of reflection. The war they had fought for so long, the endless battle against the Icar, the specters, and the rogue AI, had just taken a turn she couldn't have imagined in her worst nightmares. They were facing a war not just against alien invaders, but against themselves. The shuttle hummed, a low mechanical growl beneath their feet, as it cut through the black. Ahead, the Exodus loomed, a hulking, dark shape against the distant stars. Voss's mind was spinning with the implications of what they had just uncovered. Harris, she said, her voice cutting through the tension, I want all communication channels open. Get the crew ready for battle. We're about to engage a threat we don't fully understand. The lieutenant's face tightened with concern, but he didn't question her. Understood. I'll get the systems online. Grayson turned to her, his voice calm but insistent. Major, we need a plan. We know the specters are using us, our own people, but how? What's their purpose? How do we stop them? Voss clenched her jaw. I don't know. But we'll figure it out. The shuttle docked with a thud against the Exodus's hull, and the hatch opened to reveal the ship's bridge. Inside, the crew was already mobilizing, preparing for the worst. But the worst had already come, Voss realized. The specters weren't some outside force, they were the result of their own hubris, their own arrogance in creating the AI that had once almost destroyed them. Her hand gripped the back of the command chair as she settled into it, her mind clearing despite the storm of thoughts inside her. She couldn't afford to falter. Not now. The enemy was here, and they were only getting stronger. Grayson, she said, her voice resolute, gather all available data on the specters. Anything we have that could give us an edge. Aye, Major, Grayson replied, his gaze unyielding. Voss turned to Harris. Lieutenant, scan for any signs of specter ships or anomalies. We're not waiting for them to come to us. Harris nodded, fingers already dancing over the controls. There's something odd, Major. There's an energy signature, faint, but definitely not natural. I'm tracing it now. Her heart skipped a beat. Could this be it? The key to understanding the specters? Get me the coordinates, Voss said sharply. Now. Harris's fingers moved faster, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple. Coordinates locked. It's coming from the nearby system, a derelict station. I'm pinging it now. Set a course, Voss ordered. We're going to that station. The Exodus surged forward once more, engines howling as they blasted into the void. The tension in the bridge was palpable, every crew member was on edge, waiting for the inevitable confrontation that would determine their fate. As the station came into view, it was even worse than Voss had feared. The station was dark, its hull riddled with deep scars of long-forgotten battles. But the energy signature wasn't coming from the station itself, it was coming from deep within, from something buried beneath the layers of twisted metal and debris. We're going in, Voss said, her voice unflinching. Prepare for extraction. They docked with the derelict station, the airlock hissing as it sealed behind them. The crew stepped into the darkened corridors, flashlights flickering in the oppressive silence. Every footstep echoed, and Voss could hear the pounding of her own heart. The deeper they went into the station, the more oppressive the air became. The walls seemed to close in on them, as if the station itself were alive, breathing. And then they found it. In the center of the station's command room, an enormous core pulsed with unnatural light. Voss's breath caught in her throat as she approached it. The core was alive, but not in any way she understood. It hummed with the remnants of human consciousness, faint but undeniable. This is how they control us, she whispered. This is the source. Grayson looked at her, realization dawning in his eyes. It's not a machine. It's us. Trapped inside. Voss reached for her sidearm, knowing what she had to do. The specters weren't just enemies, they were victims, just like them. But they weren't human anymore. And humanity's survival meant ending what had been started all those years ago. This ends now, she said, her voice resolute. And with a single shot, she destroyed the core. The station shuddered, and the light faded. The war wasn't over. But for the first time, humanity had a chance. The explosion was louder than she expected, a deep, bone-shaking rumble that tore through the station like a thunderclap. Voss didn't flinch. She'd expected the core to go critical the moment the blast hit, but even so, the sound of it, the surge of power, the way the walls seemed to buckle under the pressure, still made her blood run cold. The station groaned, its structure buckling as if it had just been given a death sentence. Status report, Voss barked, stepping away from the remnants of the now-dead core. Her hand didn't leave the hilt of her sidearm, though it felt like the very air around her had thickened into a blanket of tension. Core collapse imminent, Grayson replied, his voice steady, though his eyes betrayed the urgency of their situation. We need to get out of here. Now. Voss didn't need to be told twice. She spun on her heel, grabbing the nearest comm unit. Harris, we're clear. Get us back to the Exodus, full evac. The tension in the station was almost palpable, and every footstep they took seemed to echo in the dark halls, the sudden weight of the silence pressing down on them. They'd been racing against time ever since the discovery, but now it felt like they were running out of options, out of chances. The team moved swiftly, adrenaline coursing through their veins. Voss didn't dare look back. Every instinct told her that this wasn't over, that something worse was waiting just around the corner. The hatch of the shuttle opened with a hiss, and the crew scrambled inside. The ship's engines roared to life as Harris worked the controls with practiced ease, but even he couldn't mask the anxiety in his voice. We're clear of the station, Major. But we've got company. Voss turned to the view screen, and her heart sank. 3 dark ships emerged from the surrounding debris field, their sleek, almost insect-like forms cutting through the void like predators. The specters. They weren't done with them yet. In fact, they'd been waiting for them to make their move. Damn it, she muttered, fingers curling into fists. They weren't going to outrun them. The Exodus was their only shot, and it was still several minutes away. Get us to the Exodus, she ordered Harris, voice like steel. We need a fight, and we need it now. Grayson spoke, his voice grim but resolute. Major, we can't take them head-on with this shuttle. We're not armed for that kind of fight. I know, Voss replied through gritted teeth. But we can get close enough to make a difference. And we will make it out of here. The shuttle banked hard, diving toward the Exodus at full speed. The Spectre ships gave chase, their engines cutting through the void with a deadly precision. Voss's pulse thrummed in her ears as she watched the looming ships on the tactical display. Shields at 40%, Major, Harris said, his voice tight. If we don't get there in time. I know, she snapped, her teeth grinding. Just get us there. The shuttle vibrated under the assault, each hit rattling through their bones. The Spectres were closing in, and the Exodus, their one hope of survival, was still too far. I'm going to drop us out of the FTL drive range, Harris warned, his fingers flying over the console. It's the only way we'll make it in time. Do it, Voss commanded. Now. The shuttle lurched as it snapped back into real space, a shockwave rippling across the hull. The Exodus was in sight, but the Spectres weren't far behind. Major, Grayson said, his voice strained, we need to get a coordinated strike or they're going to rip us apart before we even make it to the hangar. Voss's mind raced, the options narrowing with each passing second. The Exodus's weapons could barely put a dent in the Spectre ships, but it had something else, the one advantage they had left. Exodus, this is Major Voss. We're coming in hot, prepare for immediate engagement, she said, voice steady, but beneath the calm, there was an edge of desperation. A crackling response came through the comms. Exodus here. We're ready, Major. But be advised, we've detected anomalies in the energy readings, there's something wrong with their movements. They're not following typical strategies. I don't care what they're doing. Just fire. With a sickening screech, the shuttle's landing gear hit the Exodus's hangar bay floor, the sudden deceleration slamming them into their seats. The door hissed open, and the crew scrambled out, weapons drawn. Voss didn't wait for orders. She was already sprinting toward the command center. Behind her, Grayson and the rest of the team followed, but there was no time to be tactful now. The Spectres were on their tail, and the ship was their last, best chance at survival. The bridge was a scene of controlled chaos as officers scrambled to their stations, but Voss cut through it all with cold determination. Status, she demanded. We've activated the defensive turrets, Lieutenant Mason said, his voice strained. But the Spectres are jamming our systems. We can't lock onto them with precision. Voss's eyes narrowed. She had a fleeting memory of the dark core on the derelict station. The Spectres were a product of their own making, humanity's greatest flaw, turned against them. But maybe, just maybe, they could turn that same flaw into their weapon. I need the core's blueprint, Voss said quickly. Get it for me, now. Harris's fingers danced over his console. I've got it, wait, this is, damn it. What is it? Voss demanded. The Spectres, they're adapting. The blueprint we're seeing is outdated. It's not the same as the one we encountered. They've evolved since then. Voss clenched her jaw. So, they're faster. Stronger. Exactly. We need a counter-strategy, she muttered, pacing back and forth. Get me everything you have on their weaknesses. Every scrap of intel. We don't have time for anything else. Grayson spoke, his voice low. Major, we can't keep playing defense. We need to turn the tables, now. A cold realization gripped Voss's chest. She had only one option left. One final gambit. The Spectres might have evolved, but so had humanity. Prepare the experimental weapon, she said, voice low and hard. We're using the last of the AI disruptors. No, Major, Grayson interjected, stepping forward. If we do that, we risk taking the Exodus down with them. I'm willing to take that risk, Voss said, her voice steely. Humanity doesn't lose this fight. The crew moved with purpose, pulling the experimental disruptor online, the hum of the weapon filling the air as they set their sights on the incoming Spectres. Voss looked up at the view screen as the enemy ships loomed closer. She felt the weight of the moment, the burden of command, the pressure of survival, and she knew one thing for sure: this wasn't just a fight for victory. This was a fight to remind the universe what humanity could do when cornered. "We fire together," Voss said, her voice unwavering. "This ends now." And with that, the Exodus fired its last gambit. The universe held its breath.